Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Thanks for taking the time to do so. This session is going to be recorded. Of course, we're not giving any type of legal advice or tax advice. You can certainly, we encourage you to ask questions in the chat feature, and I'll answer them live here in person. A recording is going to be posted on YouTube after the fact, so you can come back and rewatch it, or if you have to step away. So today's session is going to be going over a deep dive of solo 401k distribution rules, which is a very popular topic. Just to be crystal clear as far as the scope of this section, this session, I should say, is we are not going to be going over the CARES Act distribution rules. So that's as part of the recent stimulus. So that was covered in a prior session. So please just, check out the YouTube channel. You can see a link to that session. All right, let's get started. So anytime we're talking about distributions, we've got to make sure that we're analyzing whether or not the person is eligible to take a distribution. So there's different triggering events. There's got to be a distribution event before you can take a distribution. So generally, unless you're age 59 and a half or older, you're only going to be able to take money from your solo 401k in certain scenarios. So depending on the source of the funds or depending on the scenario. So if you rolled over money to the solo 401k, for example, let's say you rolled over money from your former employer plan or an IRA, a non-Roth IRA, you can always take those rollover contributions out at any time. If you contributed money to the solo 401k as a voluntary after-tax contribution, you are also eligible to distribute those funds out at any time. If you suffered a hardship, and we'll talk about those hardship distributions in depth on the next slide, but that would be another distribution event that would entitle you to be able to take a distribution. As far as employer contributions, so when you have a solo 401k, you can make multiple types of contributions. You can make an employee contribution. You can also make an employer contribution. So because in the words of the IRS, you're both the employee as well as the employer. So for example, that would be for an S corporation, the employer limit is 25% of your W-2 wages. So with respect to those employer contributions, you can take those out if they've been in the plan for at least 2 years, or if the participant has participated in the solo 401k for at least 5 years. And of course, if you shut down your self-employed business, that would also be a distribution event. So please don't hesitate to ask questions if you've got, as we go through the slides, or if you can save them to the end, it's up to you. So now let's dig a little deeper as far as hardship distributions. So the rules on the hardship distribution rules, they've been in the past, recently in the past couple of years, there's been regulations that have been issued to ease some of the restrictions on hardship distributions. So let's first though start out with the basics in terms of what a hardship is. So a 401k may permit distributions made on account of a hardship, which is defined as an immediate and heavy financial need, and the distribution must be necessary to satisfy the financial need. And that need could include the need of your spouse or your dependent. So there's different elements you've got to satisfy. It's got to, again, be that immediate and heavy financial need as the first element. So examples of an immediate and heavy financial need would be certain medical expenses, costs relating to the purchase of a principal residence, excluding mortgage payments, certain tuition and related educational fees for the next 12 months. If you need to make a payment to prevent eviction or foreclosure on your primary or principal residence. And so if you have certain close family members, expenses related to their burial or funeral costs. And then certain expenses related to the repair of your principal residence. Now, keep in mind, this is not going to be, remodeling your kitchen, but if you, for example, or your house is hit by maybe a tornado, that would be the type of expense that might qualify as an immediate and heavy financial need. So you want to make sure that you're documenting that in your file. So you want to determine that you got that need. You want to document that you have that need, and then that the amount of the distribution is necessary. So that's another element here, is that the distribution amount must be necessary to satisfy the financial need. Now, in determining how much is needed, the rules do allow you to gross up that amount. So if you need to take a greater distribution in order to satisfy federal, state, or local taxes or penalties, that would be acceptable. You do need to use other resources first, like insurance or selling other assets. So let's say that you're able to satisfy this test and you've got the good documentation in your file. So let's talk about some of the mechanics of a hardship distribution. So a hardship distribution is not going to be subject to the 20% withholding requirement, but it is taxable and it is subject to the 10% early withdrawal penalty. The distribution cannot be repaid to the plan or rolled over to an IRA or a qualified plan. So it's not like a 60-day rollover. No 60-day rollovers are allowed. Now, some of the recent changes that were enacted or been promulgated to ease some of the prior restrictions include eliminating the 6-month suspension of elective deferrals. So previously, under the rules, you were not allowed to continue to make employee contributions to the solo 401k for 6 months. You had to suspend that. And that went to the notion of having to use other resources first. So the logic there is that, well, you should stop. If you really have this immediate and heavy financial need, we want you to access all your resources before you, or the rules were designed so that you would have to access all your other resources before you would tap your 401k money. So that means, okay, let's stop making elective deferrals for 6 months. But they've eliminated that requirement. They've also eliminated the requirement to take all available 401k loans. So, and that, I mean, if you look at some of the guidance around that, there was just sort of different schools of thought and perhaps some inconsistency in how plans were administering and enforcing those rules. So that's all been streamlined. Okay, well, so again, don't hesitate to ask questions, and we'll move on to the next slide here. So let's talk about the mechanics of how to take a distribution. So with our process, we've got a very streamlined process. We would provide you a distribution form so that you can give us the information that we would need in order to prepare the required tax reporting. So the 1099-R, for example, that's part of our services that we handle it for no additional charge. Then you would transfer the money. If we're talking about a cash distribution, you transfer the money via check or wire, ACH, to your personal account. If it's an in-kind distribution, you would need to transfer the title to the property. Let's say it's an in-kind distribution of real estate. You would transfer the title to your name personally. And of course, the rules there are going to vary and depend on the rules in your geographic area in terms of how you transfer, say, title to real estate. Step 3, you're going to need to pay the mandatory 20% federal tax withholding. Now that needs to be paid by the 15th of the month following the date of the distribution. If it's an in-kind distribution, it's going to be based on the fair market value. So for example, with real estate, you would a popular approach there is using comps in the area. So the amount of the 20% federal tax withholding needs to be paid electronically, again, by the 15th of the month following the date of the distribution through the EFTPS system. Now, keep in mind that it does take time to register for that system. So you don't want to wait until the 10th of the month or even the 5th of the month following the date of the distribution. You're going to want to start to register sooner rather than later to make sure that you can meet that 15th of the month deadline. Step 4, file IRS Form 945 by January of the following year. So good question here. So, and we're going to get to that in step 5. So let's just finish the steps. But so file Form 945 by January of the year following the date of the distribution. So that's a very important step to complete that Form 945. Now on to step 5, file Form 1099-R and pay taxes and penalties due. So again, we prepare that form based on the distribution form that you provide under step 1. So that's communicating to the IRS the amount of the distribution code. For example, if it's a taxable distribution under 59.5, you could have a code 1 in box 7, and then you would include that amount as income on your 1040 for the year of the distribution. So if you take the distribution in 2020, we would prepare the 1099-R by February of 2021, and then you would include that on your taxes, your 1040, for example, at the federal level, to inform the IRS of that income that you earned essentially by taking the distribution. At that time, you're going to have to pay income taxes. So the amount of the income tax is going to be based on your tax rate, right? You'll also have to pay a 10% penalty, early withdrawal penalty. So that's where we want to highlight the difference here. So to the good question that was asked in the chat. So the difference here is that the 20% withholding, that's just a federal tax withholding. So you might be in a 20% tax bracket, plus you have to pay a 10% penalty. So if that's a $10,000 distribution that you're taking, you're sending $2,000 through the EFTPS system to the federal government by the 15th of the month. On your 1040, you're going to report $10,000 of income. So essentially, you've prepaid $2,000 of taxes. You're going to have to owe a 10% penalty. So that's $1,000. If your income tax bracket is 20%, just to keep it simple, you're essentially going to owe $3,000. So you owe $3,000. You've already paid $2,000. So you're still going to have to pay another $1,000 when you file your taxes the following year. Now, if you are in a different tax bracket, you might not owe any more money because you've essentially already prepaid those taxes by paying that federal tax withholding by the 15th of the month following the date of the distribution. Or you may even owe less, in which case you might get some of that money back. So, but that's the rule, is you've got to do the 20% withholding. That is not the tax though. That is not the penalty. That's just the withholding. So we've got to keep those concepts separate in our head. So it's kind of like if you have a W-2 job somewhere, your employer is going to withhold your taxes, and then you have to file your taxes, the following April. You may owe more money. You may ultimately owe less money, so you get a refund. So, but the withholding amount is not the taxes. That's the withholding requirement. Ultimately, the taxes and penalties are calculated when you file your taxes the following year. So hopefully that addresses that good question. So if you're over 59.5, we've got some more questions that came in here. Thank you so much for asking those questions. We do appreciate that. If you're over 59.5, do you have to pay the 10% penalty? No, you do not. So it's based on your age. So if you are over 59 and a half, just to kind of shed some more light on that, let's go back to our distribution events screen. So there, if you're over 59 and a half, you don't have to worry about a triggering event. You can go right to taking a distribution. So, and on top of that, you don't have to worry about the 10% penalty. Now, of course, the Uncle Sam is always going to want to be able to tax this money. So you're still going to have to include it in your income, etc. And again, just to kind of go, now that we've kind of learned about the process, let's highlight again here, hardship distributions are not subject to the 20% withholding requirement. And it kind of goes to the idea that the idea is that you need this money. And so let's get as much money as you can to you now, and then you'll worry about the taxes and penalties next year. So please don't hesitate to ask more questions. I'm happy to keep fielding them. And thank you everyone for joining and taking time to do so. Again, let's please connect and subscribe, like the video. I'd really appreciate that. And hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.